You're the new headliner. I saw it. I took a picture. I trained for that. You don't know how many times Altan drove me into the ground. Altan? I stopped thinking about who was in front of me. I pushed every day until I could take him down. That's all I trained for. I wanted to see you. If I stayed where I was, I wouldn't get there.
This is Men Being Too Intimate, Season 4. What we trained for. Temülen closed the laptop and waited for the screen to go black, then slid it into his bag. The desk was already in order, notes stacked to one side, pen set along the edge. He reached for the small wrapped object beside it and drew it closer. He loosened the knot with a short pull and opened it enough to check inside. The carved piece rested in the center. He turned it once between his fingers, set it back, folded the cloth over it, and tightened the knot with a firmer pull. He opened the inner section of the bag and slid it in. He lifted the strap over his shoulder and stepped away. A group slowed near the stairs, talking across each other as they descended. Temülen shifted his path and passed along the side, continuing down. The doors opened onto the street. Light hit across the glass buildings ahead and broke as he moved. Traffic ran through the intersection in steady lines. He stopped at the signal, shifted his weight once, then crossed as it changed. He turned into a bakery just off the corner. Inside, the counter was set in rows. Temülen stepped forward, scanned once, and pointed.
2 packs, please.
He continued toward Ulaanbaatar railway station. His phone lit up. He read the message while walking, held his thumb over the screen, then locked it and dropped it into his pocket. At the platform, he boarded and moved down the row, sliding his bag into the overhead rack and pushing it back until it cleared the edge. He took his seat. Bags shifted under seats as people repositioned them. A thermos rolled across the floor and stopped at the edge of a shoe. Temülen leaned his head back and closed his eyes. He woke as the carriage shifted and people began to stand. He reached up, pulled his bag down, and moved toward the door with the others. The doors opened. He stepped out and cleared the platform, the bakery bag still in his hand. The training ground had been worn flat by repeated drills. Bat-Erdene trained for Naadam. Bat set his hands on his partner and drove in, chest tight, breath pushing through his teeth as he forced the contact. Heat built under the sun. Sweat ran from his neck across his chest and down his ribs as their bodies pressed and shifted for position. Bat tightened his grip and lifted. The body rose, resisted, and dropped back. Bat released and stepped back, pulling air in through his nose, chest rising hard. Sweat ran along his shoulders and down his back as he rolled one side and stepped in again. The contact landed heavier this time. Chest to chest. Skin slick where they met. His partner pressed back, breath rough, eyes set. Bat shifted his stance and cut across. His partner followed and stayed with him. Their feet dug into the dirt, grinding it down under the pressure. Bat stepped in again and lifted. A low sound breaking out of him as the weight came up against him. The hold tightened. The body resisted. He forced it higher and drove down. Dust lifted around them. His partner rolled and came back up, breath heavy, shoulders rising and falling. They closed again, bodies meeting with force. Bat drove, cut, and forced the angle. He stepped in and lifted, the sound coming out of him again as the weight shifted into his hold. At the edge of the circle, Temülen stood with a bag in his hand. Bat's eyes widened. A smile broke across his face. The grip slipped. His partner let out a short sound as the weight turned through the hold. The turn came through him. Bat went down flat, face first into the dirt, the impact driving through his shoulders as dust rose and spread. The air left his chest. He stayed there, breath pulled short, eyes fixed toward the edge of the circle where Temülen stood. Bat pushed up from the dirt, breath catching. Dust set across his face and along his mouth. He wiped once with the back of his hand and stepped forward. Temülen stepped in. Bat's hands came up and locked at Temülen's sides as he pulled him in. Temülen held his ground. Bat stayed close, breath still uneven. His grip set firm across Temülen's back. Bat's partner stepped in from the side, eyes set on him, then broke into a grin. The man stepped in and pulled him into a hold, one arm across his shoulders, knocking into Bat as he did.
City boy now.
Temülen took the contact and stayed with it. He lifted the bakery bag between them and opened it. Temülen pushed one piece toward Bat. Bat leaned in and took a bite. his eyes lifting back up and locking on Temülen as he chewed. A smile broke across his face. Hands came in from the sides. The others took pieces, voices crossing as they moved.
Come.
They moved across the ground together, past the edge of the training space and into the open stretch beyond. Bat took another bite, still watching him. Poles stood in the ground with ropes pulled between them, strips of cloth tied along the line. Bat led him past it and over a low rise, then down into a dip where the grass rose higher and blocked the view from the field. He turned him in and kissed him, hard, direct, his hand set at Temülen's back as he pulled him close. Bat brought one hand up, pushing Temülen's hair back from his face and holding it as he looked at him.
I missed you. Me too. You look so good. Do I?
Bat dragged his hand across Temülen's cheek, spreading the dirt.
Now you do.
His hand dropped to Temülen's waist and pressed in.
Is that a belly?
He pinched once. Temülen hit him. Bat laughed, caught him, and pulled him back in, one arm closing around his shoulders.
Did you come straight here?
Temülen nodded.
For how long? Just over the weekend.
Bat kept his hold.
Stay at the dorm.
Temülen shook his head.
Tomorrow. I should at least say hi to my family.
Bat looked at him, then pulled him in again and kissed him. Shorter this time, his hands still set at his back. A voice carried from the field.
Bat! Where are you? Coach is looking for you!
Bat held there, then pulled back, his hand still at Temülen's waist. His thumb pressed once at Temülen's jaw, then dropped.
Tomorrow then.
Temülen nodded. Bat stepped up the slope and broke back toward the field as the call came again. Temülen walked the road toward the houses, smoke rising from a few of them and drifting flat across the sky. The wind carried through the open ground and pushed against him. He turned in through the gate and crossed the yard, passing the stacked wood. A small garden sat off to one side. His grip tightened on the bag. He stepped into the space behind the shack and stopped. The day before he left, Bat stood in front of him, holding him there.
Don't go.
Temülen held his position.
You know I have to go.
Bat shook his head and stepped closer.
I know, but don't go.
Bat closed the space and pulled him in, his arms locking across Temülen's back as his face pressed into his chest, the grip tightening as his shoulders pulled in. Temülen looked at him.
It's not a goodbye. I know. I don't want this to be the last thing I remember.
Bat tightened his hold, his breath breaking against Temülen's shirt as he pressed into him.
I'll be back often. I'm going to miss you. Me too.
Bat stepped back a fraction, then drove forward again and locked him in closer, his arms tightening as he held on.
Don't go.
Temülen didn't answer, his hand continuing across Bat's back while the hold stayed between them. Bat pressed into him and kept his grip set, not letting the space open. Temülen stood in the dip. The space held a moment longer. He stepped back up and moved toward the house. Next morning, Temülen stepped out to the yard. His mother came out behind him with the bag already packed, set it into his hands, and tightened the cloth at the top.
Take it straight there.
Temülen nodded. She watched him a second, then turned back inside. Temülen crossed the yard and went out through the gate, the road opening ahead with the low spread of houses and uneven fences, a few animals moving near the posts. He kept his pace as the field came into view, the approach widening where people moved in and out along the main path. A line of placards stood along the entrance. Temülen slowed, pulled out his phone and lifted it, angling the frame across the line before settling on Bat's face, holding it there a moment, then lowering the phone as the noise from the field carried over. He moved on and stepped up into the seating where the full circle held in view, set the bag beside him and let his hand rest over it once before dropping it. Pairs crossed the ground, bodies locking and breaking, dust lifting underfoot and settling back across the surface. Bat stepped forward. Temülen raised the phone again and held it steady as Bat set his stance. Bat drove through the hold and forced the turn until the body came up and hit the ground. Temülen held the frame as Bat drove forward and carried the contact across the center. As the movement reset, Bat's head turned and his eyes found Temülen. His hand lifting once in a brief signal, a small smile forming before he dropped it and stepped back in. Temülen tapped again, held the frame a second longer, then lowered the phone and kept his gaze on the field. The table filled before Temülen could settle, plates landing and bowls passing as hands reached in from every side. voices rising while another chair dragged in and someone leaned across him to get to the food. Skin still damp, the smell of sweat carried through the space as bodies dropped into the seats and reached in without pause. Temülen took his seat and set his chopsticks as the lid came off the container, the smell drawing them in closer.
I missed your mother's food.
Hands moved in at once.
Temülen brought so much food.
Temülen nodded as the food passed along, shoulders pressing in around him while they leaned closer.
So what are you studying?
Medicine.
A few heads lifted.
Medicine? You serious? City made you smart.
Someone laughed and knocked into his shoulder while reaching across.
You even have time to sleep? Or just books all night?
Temülen answered where he could, his words short as another question came in and cut across him.
Did you meet Altan?
Temülen looked up.
He's in Ulaanbaatar now, national level.
A hand gestured across the table.
That's next. Give him a few years.
Bat didn't answer. His gaze stayed on Temülen. Temülen met it once. Under the table, his knee found Bat's and held. Temülen reached into the dish, took a piece, and set it onto Bat's rice. Bat's hand paused.
You got yourself a girl there?
Another voice broke in. Laughter rose.
Of course he's in the city.
Temülen shook his head.
No.
He already has one.
Someone leaned back and pointed across the table at Bat. Laughter moved through the table. Bat didn't move. Temülen didn't pull back. Their knees stayed pressed under the table while the noise carried over them.
Tonight he stays with Bat. Lock the door!
More laughter rolled through as hands kept moving, plates shifting. Bat's eyes stayed on Temülen. Bat pushed the door in and stepped inside, water still on his skin, hair pushed back. Temülen turned at the table, the laptop still open, the screen casting a low glow across his face. Bat moved in behind him, set his hand on the edge of the screen and closed it.
You're not going to look at that.
Bat turned him and pulled him in, their bodies meeting as his arms closed around him. Temülen's hands came up to Bat's sides, feeling the heat still on his skin.
You're the new headliner. I saw it. I took a picture.
Bat's hand moved across his back.
I trained for that. You don't know how many times Altan drove me into the ground.
Temülen lifted his head slightly.
Altan?
Bat nodded once. His hand stayed at Temülen's back, pressing in as he spoke.
I stopped thinking about who was in front of me.
Temülen stayed with him.
I pushed every day until I could take him down. That's all I trained for.
Temülen didn't move.
I wanted to see you. If I stayed where I was, I wouldn't get there.
Bat leaned in, his mouth brushing Temülen's cheek, then found his mouth. Temülen moved into him as Bat stepped back and pulled him with him. Bat pulled him down and rolled, bringing him in closer, legs tangling as the space closed. Bat reached back, found the lantern, and blew it out. Dark took the room as they kept moving, the contact carrying through without break. Temülen's hand moved across Bat's back, feeling the strength set into it. Light came in low across the room and settled along the edge of the bed. Temülen woke against Bat's chest, his hand resting over the muscle there. He pressed lightly, feeling how firm it had become, then ran his palm down Bat's arm. Bat's breathing stayed steady beneath him.
You don't know how many times Altan drove me into the ground.
The line stayed with it. Temülen closed his eyes. Altan stood in front of him. The grip came in. Temülen went down hard, his shoulder taking it first, the ground striking through him, dirt pressing into his cheek as the air left his chest.
Your head is not here.
Temülen got up again. Altan didn't wait. Weight came over him. Altan pinned him, forearm set across his chest, holding him there.
I know about you and Bat.
Temülen didn't answer.
If you're leaving, don't break him.
The pressure stayed.
Don't pull him with you.
Temülen looked at him. Altan held it. Then the weight lifted. A foot dragged through the dirt and kicked it across Temülen's face. Altan stepped back and walked off. Temülen stayed where he was. Dirt sat against his mouth. The sky held above him. A tear slipped out and ran into the dust. He didn't move. Temülen opened his eyes. Bat shifted under him. Temülen pushed up slightly. Bat's arm came up and pulled him back in. The field had already filled by the time Temülen stepped in to say his last goodbyes. He didn't make it past the edge. Hands caught him and pulled him forward.
You're not leaving like that. Not without a round.
Someone pushed Bat forward and the line opened between them. Temülen moved first, but Bat took the contact clean, cut the angle and drove through it, lifting and forcing the turn until Temülen went down flat, the impact carrying through his back as dust lifted around them. Bat reached down, caught Temülen by the arm, and pulled him back to his feet. His hand stayed there as Temülen came up. Bat's hand came up and brushed the dirt from Temülen's hair.
Let me walk you out.
Bat turned and moved with him, the space closing behind them as they stepped out of the circle and toward the entrance, the sound dropping as they cleared it. Bat pulled him in again, the hole closing without space between them, their mouths hovering close as they brushed once, quick, barely there, the hint of it enough before they pulled back with a small smile still held between them. Temülen reached into his bag and took out the wrapped piece, placing it in Bat's hand. Bat opened it and turned it once. A bracelet. Temülen took his wrist and set it in place, tightening it so it would hold.
I'll come back.
Bat nodded.
I'll make it there. You watch. I'll be like Altan. You'll be better. You're Bat-Erdene.
They kissed at the edge of the field and stayed close, holding to the promise that they would see each other again soon. An ISTP moves with precision, step by step, testing what's in front of him, building strength through what he does, holding steady without needing to say it. For Bat, nothing counts unless it holds under pressure. An ISFP moves differently, moment by moment, following what feels right, keeping what matters close, carrying meaning through what is shared rather than explained. For Temülen, not everything needs to be said to stay real. They understood it from the beginning, where to stand, what to give, what to hold on to. But somewhere between leaving and returning, something grew stronger, an ISTP and an ISFP. Different ways of moving toward the same place. But sometimes what you build apart is what brings you back together. This is Men Being Too Intimate, Season 4. What we trained for.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more stories on gay audiobooks.
Also, my short novel, Men Being Too Intimate series, are now available on Kindle Unlimited. You'll find the link in the description. YouTube membership is now open. Behind closed doors. Early access to upcoming stories. If you want to support me, please do join in. Thank you.